Yo, what's going on, Dragon Ballers? Welcome back to another video. Today we're going to talk about the top 8 breakdown from the PPG Webcam event that took place over the weekend. Lots of really cool stuff in this top 8, some of the usual suspects, but also some new innovative decks, and that's just one of the main things we're so used to seeing throughout the set 12 format. The beginning felt so solid with like the Red Broly, Dark Broly, Mecha Frieza triangle, but ever since then, and it's only been like what, 4 or 5 weeks, the meta has shifted so much, and these different variations of decks are doing so well. It's honestly a really cool thing to see. So if you guys are new here, definitely subscribe, hit that bell so you don't miss a video, and if you guys want to help support the channel, there are many links down in the description that will help do so. Particularly today, if you want to compete in events just like this that are more competitive, check out the Patreon down in the description below. You get to see where my head's at competitively, and it'll help you get your game up. That being said, let's get started. Alright, so top 8 for the PPG Webcam event. We have 3 Dark Broly taking first place. We have a King Piccolo taking second place, and we have Syn Shenron launch, which is actually a red-yellow variant. Reboot Gohan, which is actually a blue-green variant. Sometimes we see mono-green, sometimes we see blue-green. Both seem to be quite good. And then one copy of Vegex cracking the top 8 as well. Vegex not seeing a ton of top 8 representation after the nerfs it saw pre-set 12, but it still can get in there once in a while, and we'll talk more about that as we actually get into that deck particularly. Alright, so let's start it off with Dark Broly. No one really surprised here that Dark Broly went to win the event, also took 3 spots in the top 8. There was 1 week, I think it was 2, maybe 3 weeks ago, where Dark Broly actually missed a top cut entirely, and I believe it was the last webcam event, so that might have been 2 weeks ago. But just to say that, I think that was just an outlier phenomena. I don't think that's expected to happen at all, really, and this is just more proof of that. Ever since that 1 weird week, Dark Broly has been taking up a ton of spots in top 8s, and he's been, you know, winning more or less as the format has progressed. So even though there's a lot of innovation, a lot of crazy things happening in this format in terms of, you know, random decks popping up, older strategies being revisited, and different takes on new decks being, you know, successful in the meta, Dark Broly just seems to be the top deck. I am convinced it's the best deck in this format. I think that Dark Broly doesn't really have any negative matchups, and I think all of its matchups are at least 50-50, if not very favorable for Dark Broly. And there are lots of cards that do give Dark Broly a tough time. You have cards like Vegeta Using Fury, you have cards like Big Amor, you have cards like Makikabor the Broken Seal. These are all cards that do give Dark Broly a tough time, but when you think about it that way, these decks are forced to play very awkward cards that they wouldn't normally play. Like take a green deck, for example, playing Big Amor, some of which even main deck Big Amor nowadays. You take Big Amor and it really throws your own curve off as a green player, because at some point, if you're up against Dark Broly, you got to tap 2 for this card, and you're not really making any legitimate progress on your own. That is, unless your deck maybe somehow like free plays battle cards, or you have a really strong turn 1 or 2, and then you play Big Amor on like maybe 3, for instance. But just the point I'm getting at there is, you have to play these cards that, you know, disrupt your own curve. You have to, it is like a, you know, a meta warping deck in that sense, where you have to build your deck accordingly to deal with Dark Broly. Unfortunately, we don't like to see decks like that in the meta. It does feel kind of bad. You know, we've had decks like that where we had like SS3, we had Super Shenron, we had Mecha Frieza. These decks you have to build in very specific ways just to not lose to them game 1 or even throughout an entire match, right? Feels a little bit bad. I do think Dark Broly needs to see some sort of hit on the ban list, and in last week's video, I actually talked about maybe taking away the interaction for this deck being able to play Heartfelt Plea, because the 7-drop Dark Broly Unbridled Destruction is a red battle card as well as a black battle card. So you play that, you awaken, you play Heartfelt Plea, and you just produced another free 30k swinger in a deck that already produces a ton of free 30k swingers, but this one actually has skills and has triple strike, right? So it gets kind of crazy when you look at that. But what's really interesting is one of the decks that actually, you know, topped the event didn't play Plea in the main deck. They actually sided it. I'm very curious about that, because I wonder what particular matchups this player said, I want to bring Heartfelt Plea into my deck, instead of just starting with it in my deck and maybe side it out if it's dead in a matchup. Like against like hyper aggressive decks like Reboot Gohan and Red Broly, as a Dark Broly player myself, I side out Heartfelt Plea, because they're not going to give me a lot of time to set up my Heartfelt Plea play. I'm going to have to probably awaken defensively depending on the situation. So in those scenarios, I would take Plea out of my deck, but actually putting it in the side deck and bringing it into the deck, I really am curious on what the rationale was there. But besides that, maybe that is the avenue to take in terms of balancing Dark Broly, where we take away the ability for it to play Heartfelt Plea. But if the deck can still be super successful without that, I don't know, that would be interesting. Maybe it would see just a little bit less success, because again, I want to hit Dark Broly. I think Dark Broly should see some sort of minor nerf just to bring it in line with the rest of the decks in the meta. I don't want Dark Broly to be dead. I don't want like the one drop to be banned. I don't want the parasitic ball to be banned. I want the deck to still be very playable. The deck should still have its identity, but we got to find what is really taking it over the top. Maybe it's the addition of Plea, maybe it's not, who knows. If you have an idea, leave it in the comments below. Anyways, let's move on. King Piccolo taking the second place here. King Piccolo's been doing quite well. Yes, there was that mishap at the webcam event a few weeks ago where the King Piccolo was discovered to be cheating. That is quite unfortunate, but besides that scenario, this deck still does incredibly well, and the fact that this deck came to a first place finish after that whole debacle kind of shows that it's still a really powerful pick. And I do think it's a really strong pick because the deck just checks off a lot of boxes. The deck draws an insane amount of cards, and you wouldn't even think that just looking at the leader. For one, you know, starting at 6 life, you would think maybe you got to play a little bit more defense and pitch more cards out of your hand. And for 2, the leader doesn't actually draw inherently, but it's the Unison and it's Piano that draw you an insane amount of cards. As long as you can see one of the other early enough, ideally both, but at least one of the other, you're going to be, you know, blowing up your hand into a book. It's kind of insane. The deck also just plays most of its battle cards for free, right? You got any Redeeming Clan guys, Tambourine, Drum, and Symbol. Then you have your Piccolo Jr. Scion Negate, which is also a free 20k double strike blocker as long as you have your Unison in play, which again, to really get the deck rolling, you should have your Unison in play. Your goal should be to put your Unison in play. There's also a 1-drop King Piccolo that does search for the Unison as well, so that's some added consistency. The deck just does so many things for free. Red right now is in such a great spot. I think red is just the top color at the moment. Besides Dark Broly being the best deck, red just has the most decks that are able to do consistently well. You have King Piccolo and Launch definitely up there at the top. Red Broly as well, another great pick. Bulma even does some things every now and again. So red just seems to be putting up the biggest numbers in terms of decks that are very near the top. I still think Dark Broly is the best deck, but I think red is getting very close in terms of just the cards it has at its disposal. Think about some of the negates. Violent Rays Topo, excellent cards. Yamcha counterplay, not always an amazing counterplay, but in a format like this where so many battle cards are being played by skills, Yamcha really gets to shine because Yamcha does incredibly well when he can be used in counter window 2. Counter window 1, he only really works if your opponent already has an established board, but in counter window 2, he can actually hit the battle card being played by that skill, which is really strong. Syn is another one of those decks that definitely can consistently crack the top 8, but there's so many good decks in this format that besides Dark Broly, you know, and maybe like Launch and maybe King Piccolo, there are some decks that are going to be like a revolving door, right? Some decks you won't see every single week, but Syn is one of those decks that, you know, can be in the discussion on a given week. One of the main deck techs in this build that I actually really liked was Dragon Thunder in the main deck. This is essentially a main deckable Sensu Bean for Syn Shenron, and I think that's a meta call because, you know, if the format doesn't call for this card in the main, I think you put it to the sideboard. But in this format, there are actually a lot of low to the ground attacking decks that you would want this card against. You have like King Piccolo, you have Vegex, you have Launch, which can go wide and attack small. It is not the best against something like Dark Broly, which attacks very big, but at the same time, to match Dark Broly, you have like your Syn 9-drop to block, and even if they remove it with their Uncontrollable Berserker, you do draw and replay your 1-drop. And then besides that, you've got things like Poutine Dark Sorceress, you got Vegeta Unison of Fury to floodgate Dark Broly. So this deck, I think, does have a lot of things going for it. Syn seems to be quite a good pick. I really like this meta call of Dragon Thunder in the main deck. Probably something to explore if you yourself are a Syn Shenron player. Next up, we have Launch, but this is not the typical red, green, or even tricolor Launch we've been seeing in Top Cut. This is a red-yellow variant of Launch that looked to abuse the Higher Dragon from Draft Box 6, which can play skillless cards from your deck. That just gives Launch more combo fodder to get more draws on both of her sides. But at the same time, this deck was using the 1-drop Catapesla skillless to be played off that Higher Dragon to go up into your Catapesla chain, eventually ending on Catapesla Envoy of Justice. This card and this chain are just so powerful. Like before Set 12 came out, I was playing this chain in Gogeta Xeno because I wanted to jam this into something. There's so many great things about this chain. It's got barrier protection at several stages of the chain. The boss monster having critical dual attack double strike is insane. Play the 5-drop gives you removal and a draw, and when you evolve the 6-drop on top, he restands himself to put on further pressure. This engine is really insane, and again, this is one of the things I was talking about where the format just constantly changes. We see these crazy innovative decks make it into top 8s, and it's just like a new thing every week. It's honestly a really cool thing to see. It's like tuning into your favorite show every week for the new episode. This format has been really exciting in that regard. It's such a cool thing to see here. Launch seems to be one of the most creative decks in the format in terms of, you know, red green topping, tricolor topping, and now we have red yellow down in the books. Very cool stuff here. I like this a lot. Then we have Reboot Gohan here. So when we see Reboot Gohan in top cuts, we either see a mono green build or a blue green build. Those seem to be the two main ways to play this deck. I know when this deck first came out, people tried green yellow successor. Didn't really work out too well. But I think mono green and blue green are both quite good. If I play this deck, which I really am not a Reboot Gohan player myself, but if I played this deck, I think I would go with a blue green route, because in an aggro deck like this, I don't know why you wouldn't just want Senzu Bean, untap, attack, right? In my head, that's what I think Reboot Gohan wants to do. Senzu Bean with a leader like this that swings multiple times is also insane, because it's like a permanent 5k combo for the turn, obviously defensively, but also offensively when you have cards that untap and continue to swing, much like this leader does. So blue green, I think it's really good, but there's no denying the results of mono green Reboot Gohan as well. If you want to play a really cheap aggro deck, you don't want to spend too much money, you don't want to break the bank, you could play this deck. Most Reboot Gohan builds do play Primal Carnage Mass Saiyan. That is the SCR, I think, from set 10 or 11. That card is slowly creeping up in price, just as most other SCRs are. You could play the deck without it, but honestly, it's a really powerful thing, both offensively, removing blockers that are in your way, and defensively, if your opponent's going for game with a battle card, 1 energy, snipe it, don't have to worry about it. But the deck is still incredibly playable, and I would dare say oppressive without that card, so definitely keep that in mind. Next up, we have Vegex here, and this appeared to be more of like a mid-rangey build. You still play a lot of your free play battle cards. You have your Vegeta that comes out for free, your Trunks comes out for free, all that good stuff. But this build's also playing Demon God Demigod True Power Unleashed, and it honestly does make a lot of sense, because your leader Mills 5 sets you up perfectly for Demon God Demigod. The question just becomes, like, can your 2 energy be spent elsewhere to do more aggressive things? Or do you want to play just a little bit slower, play a card like Demigra, start grinding your opponent's resources out? That seems to me like a really solid way to go. You know, if you weren't playing Demon God Demigra, you'd probably be playing something like Man on a Mission to get that early double strike crit in. I think it just depends how fast you want to play it, and it honestly depends if you think, like, you know, like we saw the Syn deck, for example, maining Dragon Thunder. If you think your opponents are playing floodgates that affect you, or bean-like cards that give you a problem, maybe you want to, you know, slow it down a bit, play a card like Demigra that honestly a lot of decks have trouble removing. If you're not in green, it's actually quite hard to remove this Demigra. Played against red, played against yellow, played against blue, even black, as long as, you know, they don't have their free warp every single turn like Dark Bully does. This card just sticks on the board, wears your opponent's resources down, and eventually makes it all that much easier to go in for the kill. So I do like this kind of adaptation of Vegex. It's definitely more aggressive, but like we talked about with mid-range before, mid-range pivots from control to aggro. This would definitely be mid-range pivoting closer to aggro, so I think it's really cool. But anyways, guys, that's gonna wrap it up for today's video. Really cool stuff in the top 8 here. I do hope you enjoyed it. Let me know in the comments below what you think. Thanks for watching, and I will see you next time.